I'm Teisha Bader with the JBS News Update for Tuesday, June the 28th, 2016. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met today with United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who is visiting Israel this week, his 11th and final trip to the country in the capacity as Secretary-General. Earlier today, Netanyahu and Ban together met with the families of slain IDF soldiers, Lieutenant Hadar Golden and Sergeant Oron Shaul, both of whom were killed in the 2014 war in Gaza. And during the meeting later between Netanyahu and Ban, the Prime Minister asked the UN chief to use his influence to help secure the release of the remains of the two Israeli soldiers that are being held by terror group Hamas. He also mentioned two Israeli citizens, Avraham Mengitsu and another unnamed man, both believed to be alive, who disappeared in Gaza also in 2014.
Hamas is cruelly and illegally holding the remains of our soldiers and holding our citizens. I ask you to use your standing to help return home these soldiers and these citizens. It's a humanitarian position, an elementary humanitarian requirement that Hamas, in its criminal activities, is of course throwing into the winds. Hamas has genocidal aims. It doesn't merely practice terrorism. It says openly that its goal is to wipe away from the face of the earth a member state of the United Nations.
For his part, Ban spoke of the difficulty Israel faces in regards to the conflict with the Palestinians, but urged Israel to take courageous steps towards peace.
No solutions to the conflict will be possible without the recognition that both the Palestinians and Jews have an undeniable historic and religious connection to this land. No solutions can come through violence. It must be based on mutual respect and the recognition of the legitimate aspirations of both the peoples.
Ban also acknowledged the bias Israel deals with at the UN. He said he understood Israel's frustration that, quote, sometimes your country is held to a different standard at the United Nations. And later today, Ban also visited Gaza. Violent clashes continue today at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City. A 73-year-old woman was lightly injured from a rock thrown by masked Palestinian rioters on the Temple Mount while she was visiting the Western Wall. She was treated at the scene and then taken to Hadassah Hospital for additional treatment and later released. Israel police, meanwhile, announced this morning that it would close the holy site to tourists and to Jewish worshippers from visiting until the end of the holy Muslim month of Ramadan. This is the third straight day of violence at the site. And a woman was also lightly hurt today in the West Bank when her car was hit by Palestinian rock throwers. The incident occurred near the settlement of Ofra in the Binyamin region. The woman was treated at the scene. Damage was also caused to the front windshield of her vehicle. Yesterday, June the 27th, marked 40 years since the hijacking of Air France Flight 139, later rescued in the daring raid at Entebbe. The plane departed from Tel Aviv on that day in 1976, carrying 246 passengers, the majority of whom were Jewish and Israeli, as well as a crew of 12. It stopped in Athens, Greece, where it picked up additional passengers, among them 4 terrorists. 2 Palestinians from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and 2 Germans. The hijackers proceeded to hijack the flight shortly after it took off from Athens and headed towards Paris. They diverted the flight to Benghazi, Libya for refueling and ultimately arrived at Entebbe Airport in Uganda. The non-Jewish, non-Israeli passengers were released 3 days later. Air France Captain Michel Bakos and his crew chose to remain with the Jewish and Israeli passengers. On July the 4th of 1976, IDF commandos led by Prime Minister Netanyahu's brother Yonatan, who was killed in the raid, as were 4 Israeli citizens, rescued the passengers. Ynet reports that for 1 week in September, a joint house of worship will be open in Jerusalem. The Alpert Youth Music Center will become Amen. a home and place of worship for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The three monotheistic religions who the center said, quote, share a passion for Jerusalem in which they will coexist temporarily under the wings of the Almighty. The public will be invited to join in this experiment between September the 5th to the 11th, part of a festival in Jerusalem known as Mekudeshet, which translates as blessed or sacred. It's all part of Jerusalem's season of culture. The organizers of Amen said their hope is that the effort will help turn away from strife, from polarization, and from politics, and towards communication and common ground. And taking a look now at our programming for tonight on JBS for Tuesday, June the 28th. At 7 o'clock, a discussion on reinventing religious landmarks with Rabbi Arthur Schneier, the Reverend Kathleen Lyles, Father Anthony Andriassi, Ken Fisher, and Professor Andrew Dolkart from the Park East Synagogue in New York City. At 8 o'clock, the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, Aluf Ben, discusses liberal Zionism today with journalist Linda Scherzer, part of Hadassah's series Defining Zionism in association with the Jewish Week of New York, from the Skirball Center at Temple Emmanuel in New York City. Then at 9, Mark Golub sits down with president of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, Daniel Hartman, on L'chaim. And at 10, the American Jewish Committee honors Women of Courage at their Women's Leadership Luncheon of 2016. And coming up right after this newscast tonight at 6:30, Mark Golub speaks with the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, Jonathan Arkush, on the reasons why the UK voted to leave the European Union and the implications for British Jewry, for European Jewry, and for the State of Israel. That's on tonight's In the News. And that's the JBS News Update for Tuesday, June the 28th, 2016. I'm Teisha Bader.